Alright, here we go with the next step. At this point, our base is more or less structurally complete. The only thing that we are missing right now is the feet, which will go on after we get the motors in. We have our bearings attached. We have our 16 nuts, bolts, and washers attaching the deck to the rest of the base. We have one of our end stops currently installed. We're about to install another end stop. Again, these come in the printer bed, the heated platform pack. So we'll be using one of these switches. We need one of the white zip ties. That's going to help us attach the end stop to the deck. We have one of the larger motors, which we'll be installing, as well as the two Z-axis motors. These are the ones that are pre-wired together, so they're fairly easy to identify. And then we have 10 of the M3 8mm screws, socket head. So you will need an Allen wrench for these. We're going to be using these to install the motors. So make sure you have all those prepared, and then we will continue from there. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and mount another end stop like we did before. Again, these come out of the printer bed bag. There's a number of those switches in there. So you got one of those, one of the white zip ties. We have the base with the front facing toward us. Again, the arrows are pointing at us, and we have the part with the two small holes to the left-hand side. There's two sets on, one on the back and one on the front, but we're going to be using the one on the front, and again, we want it oriented towards the left. The switch itself, again, it has a open side, so we need to make sure we orient that correctly. So in this case, we want the open side closest to the nearest bearing. So it's going to be contacting over here. Effectively what's happening is we're going to have a piece like this that's attached to the rod, and when it gets close to the edge of its limit, then it's going to click that switch and tell the firmware to stop moving because it's reached the end of its axis. So I made a little bit of an error earlier by trying to do the zip tie from the top. Not only is that uglier, but it just didn't seem to work out quite as well. So what I'm going to do is actually feed it from the bottom up so I can tighten it down below. So fortunately the holes are on the outside of the deck, even relative to the front and rear plates, so that makes it a lot easier than having to feed it from the inside. So feeding it up to that side, making sure we have things oriented correctly, going through the left hole, at least from my perspective, getting that situated down, feeding that over and down to the other hole, and then making sure to line that up with the second hole in the deck, and then pulling that down through so that we have no slack up top and it's a nice clean look. And then we want to feed it through the other side of the zip as tight as we can by hand. Looks like we need to adjust that just a bit. Get some more pulled through from the top. Well, that's going to be pretty tight. You have to feed some up from the bottom first. These zip ties are pretty tight relative to the holes that we were given to work with in these kits. So. Alright, that should work better. So now we have it nice and clean on the top, and then on the bottom we can get it situated. Okay, it looks like we want to get just a little bit more if we can. So I'm going to push that up. And again, up on one side so that I can pull down on the opposite side. And I need to use these guys. Pull it down taut, and then finally Alright, so the end result is a nice, clean, and tight switch connection that's not going to go anywhere. Again, I'm going to leave this tail on here for now just in case we want to do some more cleanup and tightening later on, but it's on there pretty good. So the next step, actually, we may as well go ahead and do this now. There's a slot right behind the switch. In fact, it's right in the center there. Let's see if we can see it on camera. So the intention of that is so that you can feed this connector through, because ultimately it's going to be connecting to the printer board. Of course, we want the wires to be as neat as possible, so I'm going to go ahead and not run them around that, but run them through there. And just be careful that we don't tear off any solder connections. And so just watch how they go through there. So the yellow is okay, and the black is just a little bit of encouragement there, and yeah, we should be good to go for now. So now we have these lovely yellow and black wires from the two end stops that we currently have installed. Again, these will both be going to the printer board, which will be mounting underneath inside here on the Printrbot Plus. There's plenty of room, so it's going to mount directly in there, whereas the regular LC has a little more trickery on the wood structure underneath to make that happen. Okay, now we will move on to the Z-axis motors. So if you don't have those ready, go ahead and get them out. We'll be doing those in the next step. Alright, we're now going to be installing the Z-axis motors. Again, this is the pair of smaller motors that is pre-wired with a single connection paired together, and these are actually going to be installed from underneath on these outer holes, the holes that have the slot sort of cut into them. Again, we're going to be coming up from underneath. The only thing we really need to consider is the fact that we have one of the end stops here on the back side, so I'm probably going to run the wires around the front, or towards the front, since the motors have the wires coming out of the side as opposed to the bottom or anything. So I'm probably going to mount it such that the wires are going towards the front, just to kind of keep them out of the way of those. And I have the printer board box just kind of set up to give me a little platform to work from. Let's see what we can do like that. And again, take one side at a time. So this is my front, and I'm going to fortunately have kind of access to the side over here, so it makes it a little easier to hold the motor up as we align the holes, and having a nice lamp nearby certainly helps to get down and see into the holes. Again, these are using the M3 8mm socket head screws. They use an Allen wrench to tighten down, but right now we just want them kind of very loosely attached to the motor threads. We definitely don't want to strip out the screws, or more importantly the motor threads themselves, because then we have to either retap the motor or buy a new motor, and neither one of those options is very fun. So now I have all of them finger tight, So I'm going to take my Allen wrench and using a crisscross approach so that things are sort of evenly tightened. And again, we're not looking to tighten it all the way on any particular pass. We just want to do it maybe a turn or so on each one, and then repeat the same pattern until we get everything tightened down. You find that even after one is tight, after you've gone and tightened some of the other ones, that original one is now loosened up in some cases. So it's always good to do one final pass just to kind of test the torque on it and get everything about the same tightness. Yeah, these are all pretty much already there, so we are set on that side, and it's basically repeating the same thing on this side, just watching out for the end stop that we've already installed. I'm going to turn this box around, it's not very stable like that. And again, with the wires front side, so I'm going to run the wires out the opposite side of where these wires are for the end stop, just to kind of keep things out of the way. And again, same procedure. Just get it roughly lined up and then start. You definitely can tell a difference from the other side with the amount of room that's available because of this end stop. It may actually be a good idea to put a bit of insulation against those connectors just to be on the safe side. It should be easy enough just to slide something in there after the fact, but let's see if we can get it actually mounted. Try to get these holes aligned. Got to grab there. So we'll be able to get this lined up. Let's try this one here. And it's definitely mentioned in some of the documentation that this side is a bit more of a challenge because of that end stop. So I'm gonna get a couple of these a little more snug and then go back and redo this side, which is a bit more problematic. I don't want to cross thread anything by forcing these down. So I'm going to make sure I have the alignment where I want it. Kind of putting some pressure on it to pull the motor over and get the threads exactly where they need to be. Sort of following the same sort of cross pattern. Now that we have things actually connecting right. And again, it's very important to make sure you put these Z-axis motors on the outside rather than on the inside because the bolt pattern is the same. So they will install in that center set of holes if you try. And why do I know that? Because I actually did it on mistake. So you're actually seeing the second round of installing these motors. You can probably see the little indentations, the bolts from before, but fortunately I caught that in time. So that's the Z motors. We have the connected wires. These are going to go to the printer board. Ultimately, when we wire up the electronics, we will route these appropriately so it's all nice and clean underneath. The one thing I do want to point out is the end stop in here, which was causing the problems. Let's see if we can get a little better view in there. And so I may want to revisit that end stop and put some insulation between the motor and the terminals there, just so there's no chance of shorting it. It's not connected electrically in any way right now, but 3/16 quarter inch is a little too close for me, so I will probably add some electrical tape or Kapton tape or whatever's handy that is appropriate to insulate that from shorting out, just in case. So next step is to add this motor, and we're going to be adding it to this side here. Again, it's the opposite side of the side that has the end stops. That's the easiest way to remember. So it's going to be going from underneath on this side, and we're only going to be using 2 of the screws at this point. So we're going to stop the video for just a moment and then come back and finish up this last part of the step. Finally, we're going to be attaching the Y-axis motor. If you recall from earlier videos, one of the very first things we did was make sure to flatten the shaft, and hopefully you guys can see it. I showed how this was done in a previous video, so the idea was to make sure that we did all this non-fun work up front. So for the Y motor, it's very important that at least the top part is flattened. In this case, I've flattened most of the shaft, but at least the top half should be flattened for the Y motor. And again, I'm going to run the wiring such that it is facing, when it comes out, it is facing the front, so that it matches up with the other motors that we've already installed. And like I've mentioned, we're only going to use 2 of the M3 8mm screws, and we're not even going to tighten them very much. They're going to be very loose, and we're going to use this mounting hole. It's the one opposite the end stops, so you don't want it on the same side. You want it on the opposite side from the end stops, even though there's 2 holes available. And we want to make sure that we use the 2 holes that are closest to the bearings. So in other words, these 2 holes are the ones we're going to use for now. And again, only use the 2, not all 4 at this point. And again, we're only going to do it hand tight. I'm not even going to use the Allen wrench at this point. I just want it attached and kind of snugged up a little bit so that it doesn't move around, but that's all we want to do for now. So at this point, the step is complete. We've got our Z-axis motors, we've got our Y-axis motors, we've got another end stop installed and ready to go, and we're ready to move on to the next step. Alright, so this next step gets a little more interesting, a little more intricate. So let's talk about the parts that we're going to be using. We're going to take 2 of the shielded skate bearings. I believe you get 6 of them total with the kit. 2 of the 1/4-inch washers. I think there's 6 of these as well. These are the larger style washers, not the ones we've been using so far. We're going to take 4 of the 3/4-inch 6/32 screws, 4 of the 6/32 nuts, 2 of the M3 by 20 millimeter bolts, as well as 1 of the M3 by 8 millimeter bolts, and then 1 of the M3 nuts. As far as the printed pieces go, this is the Y bearing guide. I'll show you. It may be white, it may be black, depending on your particular kit, as well as 1 of the XL belt pulleys. You get 2 of these in the kit. Again, yours may be black or white. The best way to identify it is the fact that you have 2 of them versus one of these other ones, which has a more herringbone gear pattern. So that's not the one you want, and it's obviously not this big one. So your only 2 choices when it comes to any sort of gearing are these 2 XL belt pulleys. And again, like I said, there's 2 of these. The issue with this particular step is that you may or may not have to do some cleanup to these various pieces to make sure that the holes are the correct size for the M3s and that everything is cleaned up. On here you may see that it's a little bit rough, so it's suggested that you get a 3 millimeter and a 5 millimeter drill bit to help clean up the holes, and an X-Acto knife to trim up some of the plastic if necessary. However, you need to be cautious that you don't trim too much or crack the pieces. In particular, one of the things that you need to do is take that slot right there and ensure that this 3 millimeter, or I'm sorry, M3 nut fits sideways in it so that you can screw the M3 screw or bolt in the side of it and make a connection like that. So it needs to be tight enough to hold it in there, but not so tight that when you push it in it cracks. So that's some of the cleanup effort that you have to do with printed plastic parts. So definitely something to be cautious of as you're going through this step. Some of the pieces may fit beautifully. I don't think I need to do anything with this because the 3 millimeter holes seem to be perfect for these M3 bolts. So I'm not going to do anything with those. So I'm going to do a little bit of investigation of these parts and then come back and continue with the actual assembly. Alright, back to finish up this particular step. It's definitely a bit of a challenge. Like I said, you have the plastic piece that looks like this, and you have to really modify it with an X-Acto knife and drills and all sorts of tools to get a M3 nut in that slot. You need to be able to get an M3 8 millimeter bolt through there, and then a 5 millimeter motor shaft through that, and it really didn't fit in any of those, so it required about an hour of modification just to this one piece. Fortunately, this other piece is just about perfect and didn't require any modification at all. I have already mounted the other one because it was such a beast to actually get on there. Again, remembering that we've only got 2 of these, so it's kind of hanging a little crooked right there. But the basic idea is that you want to get this gear onto the motor shaft, onto that flat that we made earlier. So that's the purpose of that. I haven't tightened down the M3 just yet because I want to go ahead and assemble the other piece. So essentially what we're doing is putting the M320 bolts through the bottom of this pulley guide, and then we are going to put the skate bearings directly on top, and the idea is that they should have a good snap-on sort of fit without much play. So fortunately we didn't have to modify it to get those to fit on. And then the next step is to actually put these 1/4 inch washers on there. And now the trick is to flip the whole thing over, and then we use these bolts to actually hold the motor in place. The key is to keep all this stuff connected together though. So you don't forget the washer on the bottom. That's very key for the bearings to actually do their thing. So since you can't really see what you're lining up to, you're gonna have to hope that the other two bolts are aligning the motor up enough. It seems like they're catching, so these bearings are spinning. We've got this gear here. So now that I've got those attached, I'm going to go ahead and tighten them up just to make sure that we've got that. Oops, wrong one. And I don't want to go too crazy on the tightening, because I do not want to crack these plastic pieces, since I don't have another 3D printer to make more, and I certainly don't want to wait around for Printrbot HQ to decide to send me replacements. Alright, so the bearings are still spinning like they're supposed to. The motor's in place, and let's go ahead and tighten down the set bolt. It's effectively going through that M3, which is what's holding the whole thing together, and then we are putting pressure against the shaft with the tip of the M3 bolt against that flat shaft. It seemed to be a little challenging getting that gear onto the shaft and keeping it straight on the flat portion. So it seems like some additional work on getting that hole just right in the middle probably would have paid off a little more. So I'm trying to do this very carefully without cracking the plastic piece again, but I still want it to be nice and tight against the shaft. I think that's about as far as I'm willing to go, and it sticks out a bit, but it seems like it has the clearance it needs. I guess from this point we're going to be using one of the belts against that particular gear at some point, although not in this particular step. And I'm assuming that the bearings, the skate bearings, are going to act as some sort of like idle pulley. So yeah, that's what it seems like. Anyway, that's the completion of this particular step, basically finishing out the Y-axis motor mechanism, and we will take it to the next step in the next video. Well, actually it turns out there's one more thing that I forgot to do during this step, and this is the reason why I have these extra pieces of hardware. You may have wondered yourself, why do we have these 4 632 nuts and the 4 632 by 3/4 inch screws? Well, it's to attach the feet, and this is basically going to go one on each side, and using the same sort of technique as we've used before to mount those, using the captive nuts and the bolts. I'm not going to actually show that on video. You guys can complete that on your own. I'll have that finished before the next step though. Just wanted to throw that out there since we do have these extra pieces, and I was wondering what they were for myself. So that's what they're for. They're to mount the feet, and like I said, we'll be continuing on from the next video with the next step.